how exactly do you guys make the choice of like which belief system or which beliefs to tentatively hold? And could you talk about that for the students?
It's interesting to use the word choice. I guess I view myself as constantly evolving. I was, of course, brought up in actually two religious traditions. I was the president of my church fellowship. I took the church fellowship to the synagogue so they could understand what was going on there. And my views evolved over time. As I learned more and more about the brain, as I learned more and more about the world, I started to question the sort of accoutrements of religion, which are not the same as religious faith, obviously, and came to the tentative conclusion, I say never come to conclusions, that it is much more functional for me to operate in the world in which I will assume that I can inquire rationally into everything that exists. Now you can call that materialism if you want to, but just say everything that exists, that everything is open to rational inquiry, where rational inquiry, of course, is defined in some complex way by a set of brain circuits that I don't understand how they work and no one else, including Steven Pinker, does either. And that has served me well for the 50-something years I've been around. And as a consequence, I continue to operate under that set of assumptions, but I don't reify them as the only set of assumptions possible. I just continue to find them comfortable to work within. And I find that they allow for an analysis of the social situation in which we find ourselves, which I think is disastrous, much more effectively than other systems allow.
I got to tell you something. I didn't hear an answer there, and here's what I mean. You emphasize the fact that you're always open to new ideas, that you're skeptical, that you're always inquiring, and that you find whatever method this is to work the best for you. Mm-hmm. But I didn't hear what the method was, and what I mean by that is, the question for tonight is how do we discover truth? How do we verify truth outside the material realm? How do you answer a question of justice? How do you answer a question of morality? And I'll use one that you used as an example, which is, since you and I are not chimps, we might both go in and say, you know what, 50 cents a cup more, but darn, I'm going to buy that fair trade coffee. How do you make that decision?
Well, I wouldn't make that decision, but
okay.
how does one make that decision?
Neither would I, because I'm a tea drinker.
Yeah,
okay?
I don't drink coffee either, but that's
okay. Well, that's another point of commonality.
Right.
But how does one rationally make a decision that basically is based on, I will subject myself to a little bit of inconvenience or a slightly higher price for what I consider to be a greater good in the world? What's the belief system by which you come to that kind of conclusion, if you ever come to that kind of conclusion?
Yeah, I do. I'll give you an example that's a little bit painful to me. So I, as was pointed out, have two full-time jobs, one here and one on the West Coast. And as was pointed out, my insanity leads me to commute between them. Now, this is not consistent with my principles about how we should use energy in this world, flying airplanes back and forth every week across the country.
So you don't post your carbon footprint on the website?
Yeah, my carbon footprint. Everything else is really good. I don't own a car. I live in an apartment, but boy, that flying really kills it. So what do? So I think about this problem and I say, is the greater good achieved by me helping to make this new institution, which has a radically and I think very positive mode of education, bring it into existence, is the good of that and the number of hundreds of students who will graduate from this institution equipped to address these major global problems we face, does that outweigh the huge carbon footprint that I'm doing? So that's the kind of analysis I do.
Yes, but everything I endorse everything you just said. But everything you just said is predicated on a value. And you didn't answer how you arrived at the value. And the value is that your own actions should conform to whatever makes sense in terms of providing for the greater good. Why should your own actions conform that way? Why shouldn't they conform to what amounts to the greater good for you personally, in terms of material advantage, in terms of reproductive success, in terms of anything else? Why should you seek the greater good? What's the reason for that?
The reason is that that's what makes me comfortable in my shoes. It's not a statement that everyone should do this. I mean, I chose to have zero reproductive success because I have no interest in children. Sorry, people. And imagine I would be a terrible parent. And so I chose not to have reproductive. Now that's evolutionarily that's a little weird, right? But it was a conscious choice that I made. And so,
is it therefore equally valid for me to decide, well, the greater good makes you feel better about things, but you know what makes me feel better? What makes me feel better is I have a gun at home. I'm going to knock off a liquor store on the way home. I'm going to get that six-pack for free. Makes me feel good. Makes me feel good. How do we decide that those actions are wrong and your actions are right? What is the rubric we use?
Well, let's go back to my analogy. So what makes you feel good is to have 11 children, let's say. Right?
Well, it's made me feel good to have 2.
Yeah, but
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about 11.
No, but
okay?
someone might take
Okay.
the position that having 11 children makes them feel good. And so then the question is, well, do we live on a finite planet? And I think that's a science question that one can answer, and the answer is yes. Mm-hmm. And so if we go to our 6.7 billion people now and our 10 billion people in 2050 and maybe grow beyond that, what is going to be the consequence for the planet? And you might say, well, why do you care about the planet?
Exactly.
Well, I actually don't care that much about the planet. I give a talk on global warming that's very well rehearsed and tries to be very careful in delineating what's known and what's not known and what the misunderstandings are. And I always give it in a fairly jaunty way. And at the end, the audience is often very depressed. And they say, how can you be so cheery about this? And my answer always is, I'm pretty old. And that's the way I think about it.
Well, I give this is an aside, but I give a similarly jaunty and excited talk about global warming, and I usually end it by saying, look, we're doing, and I really mean this with all my heart, we are doing a really cool experiment on this planet, and here's the experiment. We're going to see by the time the youngest people in this room are ready to retire, if doubling the concentration of a biologically important gas like carbon dioxide, and by about 2050, we will have doubled it since the beginning of the industrial age. We're going to see if doubling the concentration of that gas has any effect on a planet. Now, I'm an experimental biologist, and the way in which I earn my living is by taking some sort of growth conditions in a culture or something like that and changing one of the key variables and seeing what happens. I can't wait to see what happens in 2050. This is an unbelievably cool experiment, and it's massive in scale, and that makes it very exciting. I just kind of wish it wasn't being done on the planet in which I happen to live. I'd like it to be done somewhere else. But nonetheless, the outcome of this and seeing what's happening from a scientific point of view is very exciting. But I want to get back, and unless you think we're completely off on a tangent here, I want to get back on, once again, why does this matter? And what I'm going to suggest to you is that in your purchase of fair trade coffee, in your passion for explaining the consequences of global warming, in your arguments for effective science education in the curriculum here at Columbia, which you've pioneered, I'm going to suggest that you are carrying inside you an ethic. And it is an ethic that is basically derived from the Judeo-Christian ethic, from the joint espousal of both faith and reason, and from the sense that we human beings have a duty not only to find the truth, but to care for this planet.
For more information about the Veritas Forum, including additional recordings and a calendar of upcoming events, please visit our website at veritas.org.